I'm an alcoholic. And it's good to be in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd like to welcome all the people here for the first conference. I also would like to welcome, I'd also like to say at this point that it's really exciting to be part of your first conference here in Lincoln, Nebraska this time of the year. I'd like to thank Andrea for coming to pick me up at the airport, and I'd like to thank Matt for trying to catch me. We played phone tag a lot. When you're a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, you're never home. You just go there to sleep. And with the 2-hour time change, it was kind of difficult to catch me when I would have to end up calling him. But it worked, and I want to thank the committee for inviting me here. And it's always exciting to come to Nebraska because I know some of you, and some of you I'm going to get to know this weekend. And it's neat to see Dick and Jerry and Jill and Peggy Martin, who I've known for years. And it's really, really good to be here and to be part of the fellowship. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous in 1967, and I didn't stay in Alcoholics Anonymous in 1967. And I always tell you how long I'm sober simply because there was one of my favorite speakers in Alcoholics Anonymous was Norm Alfie. And Norm always talked about how long he was sober. And the reason why he told you how long he was sober, because he said, with everything that's happening in Alcoholics Anonymous, he said that you might get a pension plan going here, and he wanted to get his full benefit. So just in case you get a pension plan going here, I want to get my full benefit here in Alcoholics Anonymous. I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous on June 16th, 1968, and I've been sober ever since. I just celebrated 22 years this past June, and I really had not planned to stay with you quite this long. I had learned real early in my sobriety that you talked about a mental twist that we seem to have, and I knew that I was going to get this mental twist untwisted, and I was going to leave Alcoholics Anonymous. I hate to tell you this, but that there's a lot of bends still in my mind, and it's going to take me one day at a time for the rest of my life. I believe the only ones that are really success in Alcoholics Anonymous are those who are dead. And so I'll be a success when I die if I stay sober. I believe that I'm going to stay sober. I really believe for me that I know that I've got another drunk left in me, but I could not go through another recovery here in Alcoholics Anonymous. There's absolutely no way that I could go through what I had to go through here in this fellowship. And I'm beginning to catch on this thing called living, and I really like it. And AA has been really, really good to me. My life started here in Alcoholics Anonymous. When I came to you in '67, I was 23 years of age. And I looked around Alcoholics Anonymous, and everybody was very old. I want you to know I feel real old this weekend. You know, you all look very young. I thought, my God, they're all over 36. You know, they got one foot in the grave and the other in a banana peel, ready to slide in any minute, you know. And I'm too young to be an alcoholic. I didn't know what an alcoholic was. My idea of an alcoholic was Eddie Reinhardt, who I knew down on Anaheim Street in Skid Row. And Eddie used to wear a long black coat with a rope tied around it to hold it together. And he was always trying to nickel and dime to get a bottle of wine. And that's what an alcoholic was for me. I know today that we come in all sizes and all shapes and all walks of life here in Alcoholics Anonymous. I left, the gal that took me to my first early meetings, her name was Carolyn C. And I left Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm really, really grateful that Carolyn never gave up on me. Because Carolyn would call me once in a while, maybe every week or every 2 weeks, and she would ask me how I was doing in that 8 months. And I would tell her I'm doing fine. I just had so much to drink today. I just had a few drinks today. And she'd say things like, I'm not interested in your drinking, Annie. I want to be your friend. And God, I longed for a friend. But to be her friend meant I had to go to these lousy AA meetings, and I didn't want to go to these meetings. I didn't want to be an alcoholic. And so I go off the phone and I think, yeah, I bet she wants to be my friend. The only reason she wants to be my friend, she wants me to go to those AA meetings. And I don't want to go to those AA meetings. So I got one of those brainstorms. I decided what it was a recruiting thing. And I recruit somebody for you and get you off my case. You know, so I called this friend of mine in Long Beach and I said, Eileen, you're an alcoholic. And you ought to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. And she said, okay. And so I called Carolyn back and I said, I found somebody for you. And she said, good, I'll come and get both of you. And this gal was 1.5 years sober at this time, and I couldn't tell her no. I just wanted to take Eileen. I didn't want to go. And so she came and she got both of us, and she took us to a meeting over in Anaheim, the old Anaheim Club in California. And after the meeting, there was a gal there, her name was Sue M., and Sue is still sober today, and Sue got sober very young, and she came up to me after the meeting. She said, Annie, when are you coming back? And I said, I'm not an alcoholic. She is. Look at her, you know. And I walked out of that meeting. And, you know, God has always worked in strange and mysterious ways in my life, because every time I picked up a drink from that time on, I would hear Sue say to me, when are you coming back? And when I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous, if you can understand this, when I didn't drink, I couldn't talk. I walked around most of my life with my head hanging down, feeling so ashamed, so misplaced, and I just didn't seem to fit in. And when I drank, this other person would emerge, and I was very hostile, and all of this stuff that was inside of me would come out, and it came out very distorted, and people didn't want me around. And so when on my last drunk, I stayed in it. If there is such a thing as an alcoholic personality, I stayed in that kind of personality. And when I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous, I came back very angry and very hostile, and I wasn't hanging my head, and I didn't have that feeling of shame. I tested you. I will always, from the bottom of my heart, I will always be truly, truly grateful to the people that were there for me in Alcoholics Anonymous when I came in, and when I came back to you. I came back into Alcoholics Anonymous in my first year of sobriety. I'd like to tell you, I came in here and I had an attitude of gratitude, and I was going to work these 12 steps, and I was going to do all these wonderful things. I didn't even know what the 12 steps were. I came in here very angry and very hostile, and I wanted you to, I walked around my first year of sobriety and I gave everybody the finger, and I cussed you up one side and down the other, and I very patiently waited for you to tell me to keep on going, and you didn't. You kept coming up to me and kept saying, Annie, keep coming back. I was really disappointed when I found out that you were telling everybody in Alcoholics Anonymous to keep coming back. I really thought that you had just kind of singled me out to tell me to keep coming back. I used to tell them at my home group that God sent me to teach them patience and tolerance. And, you know, there was a lot of those old members that really believed that he did, you know. They didn't know what to do with me. I was sharing with Frank last night at dinner that when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, they really didn't know what to do with me. I was really schizzy. And they took me to Schizophrenics Anonymous. And I didn't stay in Schizophrenics Anonymous. I didn't belong there either, so they decided they would just, you know, I went to a lot of meetings. I just sat in meetings. And that's all I could do, was just sit in meetings. And I'm grateful to those people that I came into, because there were people who talked about the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they talked about the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they talked about getting active in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and they also talked about cleaning house. I want you to know I'd wanted to clean his houses in Westminster until they found out what I was doing, and they said, no, that's not the kind of house cleaning we have in mind for you, Annie. The kind of house cleaning we have in mind for you is an inside job. I will always be grateful to these people because they were very patient with me, and I needed somebody with a lot of patience. I got me a sponsor right away, and I believe in sponsorship. I truly believe in sponsorship because I don't know where I would be today if I hadn't have got a sponsor. And this woman became everything for me. I used to wonder where these 12 steps were when they would talk about them. And I'd sit in the meeting and I think, where are they? And how often do you have to run up and down them? You know, I had visions of 12 stone steps somewhere. You know, I sat in meetings, and I understand today when the old timer tells the newcomer, bring the body, the mind will follow. Because I would bring my body, and I would sit in the meeting. I might get first 5 minutes of the meeting, and then I would kind of leave. My head would just trying to trip out there. I was 6 years sober when all of me arrived in Alcoholics Anonymous. You know? And it was so exciting. It really was. It was like a spiritual awakening. I'll never forget it. I was sitting at the Old Garden Grove Club, and I'm at a meeting, and I heard chapter 5, and I heard chapter 3, and I heard the 12 traditions, and I also heard the speaker, and I thought, my God, I'm here. And I pinched myself, and I thought, that's what they mean. Bring the body, and the mind will eventually follow. And I brought it long enough so that when I'm in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous today, I get most of the meeting. You know, I don't find it necessary to trip out there or to just leave in my head. I believe in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the reason I believe in the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, when I was very new and not knowing what they were, there was a guy in my home group, and his name is Jerry Froelich, and I love Jerry today because Jerry and Gloria practically raised me in Alcoholics Anonymous. They accepted me into their family. And Jerry, one night, I was about 4 months sober, and I remember running in to the meeting, and I remember running up to Jerry and saying, where are those steps? And how often do I have to run up and down them? And he kind of looked at me, and he said, Annie, he said, you go to a lot of meetings. And he said, if you listen, and he said, if you listen tonight, those steps are read at every meeting you go to. And he said, if you try to apply those steps to the best of your ability in your life, he's guaranteed me my life would change. Because, you see, I thought there was a meeting after the meeting and that you had this wonderful secret that you weren't sharing it with me. And where it is, it's in the chapter 5 in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the house stands for honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. And willingness has been the key for me. Even when I've been in the worst pain I could possibly be in my sobriety, there's always been that smidgen of willingness. And I've always been surrounded with a lot of strong people, a lot of strong women in my life that every time I want to lie down and die, they just kind of come along and pick me up and make me work those steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I did those steps to the best of my ability, and I still believe that I have to continue to do those steps. I had this thing that you did them one time and you never had to do them again, and it doesn't work that way. Because the steps I worked last year most certainly will not work for me this year, because I'm not the same person I was last year. And I did the first 3 steps, and when I came to that 3rd step, I couldn't make a decision when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I could not make a decision to turn my will and my life over to care of something I couldn't feel or touch. Now, if it was tall, dark, and handsome, had a nice car, I could make a decision real fast. Now, if you're new here in Alcoholics Anonymous, you're going to find out that you've joined a group of very narrow-minded people. That was not the kind of higher power they had in mind for me. The kind of higher power they had in mind for me was an inside thing. And I made a decision at that time to turn my will and my life over to care of people in Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't single out any one individual. I turned it over to groups of people because they were doing something with their lives that I couldn't possibly do. And I knew that. And so that worked for me until I was about 2.5, almost 3 years sober. And when I was 3 years sober, I had to surrender one more time. And it was a big surrender for me. And I found something at that time within me that my life has never been the same. I got in touch with that power that you talk about here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm not going to tell you that God and I have walked hand in hand all these years, because I like to go sightseeing and I like to go astray. But I know where my source of power comes from today. And that's all I need to know, is that my source of power comes from inside of me. And I was always looking for it out there somewhere. And I tapped into that power that the old-timers talked about here in Alcoholics Anonymous. I really thought I was going to be an exception to the rule and taking an inventory, because I thought there was a guy in my whole group, and everybody should have one, or everybody has one, and his name was John Brown. And John's wife was my sponsor. But John came up to me, and I've taken lots of inventories in Alcoholics Anonymous. But that first inventory is a real important inventory, because you start taking the top layer off of that stuff so that you can get down deep into the core of yourself. And John came up to me when I was about 9 months sober, and he said, Annie, he said, have you done the 4th and 5th step? And I said, no, John, I'm not going to. And he said, you're going to have a birthday pretty soon. And I said, yes. He said, well, the night of your birthday, he said, I'm going to get up at the podium and I'm going to announce it all over at Huntington Beach to tell them that you're not working the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I want you to know that he struck terror in my heart. Absolutely terror in my heart. I didn't take an inventory because I was willing to take an inventory. I took an inventory because I was put under pressure. I probably would never have taken an inventory if it hadn't been for him. And I left that meeting, and they used to call me Crazy Annie. And I knew that they would know that was why I was crazy, because I wasn't working the lousy steps in Alcoholics Anonymous. So I went home, and I went out and I got some paper and pencils, and I got over to Lois's. I told her I wasn't going to go to this Monday night meeting. I was going to start working on this inventory. And I want to tell you that I didn't drive for the first 4.5 years of my sobriety. And I want you to know that I never had a problem getting to a meeting or from a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I don't know if you've got this problem here, but in California, a lot of people get UDIs, and they can't get to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, or they don't have a car, and they've got all these excuses why they can't get to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I never had a problem getting to a meeting. I learned real early in my sobriety that we come in here loaded with guilt. God, we're loaded with guilt. And I was loaded with guilt, and I used to give us a list of names. And I always knew who was sober a few days more than me or a few days less than me, and I would call them up. I'd go through this list, and I'd say, if you don't come and pick me up, and I die from this disease, it's going to be your fault. And I tell you, they couldn't handle that guilt, They didn't want me to die and have that guilt on their head, so they'd come and get me. And so, but I also learned that you don't do that with old-timers, because somewhere along the line they lose that guilt. They don't have it anymore, and they lose it, and you'll call them up. I tried it once, and they said, you ride your bike, take a bus, or walk. It's real simple, Andy. You really want to get to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, this is what you do. So I arrived at Lois's. I'd gone out to Thrifty Drug and picked up all this stuff for her, and I got to her house on a Monday night, and I handed her all this stuff, and she said, what is this for? And I said, I'm going to tell you all about it. You start writing. And she kind of looked at me real strange, and she said, honey, I did my inventory. And I said, now you get to do mine. And we argued, and that's all I knew how to do was argue. And I had a lot of secrets, and they tell me in Alcoholics Anonymous that I'm as sick as my secrets. And I couldn't tell her. And this has got absolutely nothing to do with my alcoholism. It's just got to do where I came from and the setting I came from, and because of people not knowing what was wrong with me, and because of my family and the area where I was. I didn't know how to read, nor did I know how to write when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. And that was the secret I was going to take to the grave with me. And I thought that I would be an exception to the rule, that I would get away, I didn't have to do this inventory. And I really felt that the inventory really was for those of you who drank for 15 or 20 years. You were much sicker than those of us who only drank for 10, you know. That's how I felt about it. And so I couldn't tell Lois, and I argued with her, and I went home. And the next couple of weeks I would call her, and I used to think she had a machine, and she'd say, write, and I'd just hang up. And so I decided I would tell her. And I told her, I said, I can't do that inventory because I can't write. And she said, I don't care how you do it, but you do it. And, you know, in step 6 in the 12 and 12, it talks about wishful thinking. And to this day, after all these years, I still wish that I had kept that inventory, because there's no comparison to the girl that took that inventory to the woman that stands before you tonight. I made a lot of marks on that paper, and I really believe that was the first time in my life that I was going to be made take responsibility for me. And I went to that woman and I did that inventory. And I really believe that, you see, at that time in my life, a lot of educated people came into my life as school teachers in the educational field. And they took me to those psychiatrists that work with little kids in the educational area to find out what was wrong with me and why I couldn't do this. And I've always seen everything backwards. And so that's what they came up with. I have got a thing called dyslexia. I want you to know that I have papers, and I've got tapes, and I've got all kinds of things to say that I've got this thing. And today I do know how to read, and I do know how to write, and it's such a privilege. Because, you see, when I say my life began 22 years ago in Alcoholics Anonymous, my life began 22 years ago in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm really, really grateful because, you see, they said that alcoholism is a disease of the perception. And they tell me that that's what's wrong with dyslexia. People, if they don't see things, they've got a perception problem. And see, I come by mine real honestly, and I don't know what the rest of you are doing here tonight. I'm truly, truly grateful that God does not choose his victims, or alcoholism does not choose his victims. It doesn't really matter whether you have an education or you don't have an education, or you're overeducated or you're undereducated. If you have the disease of alcoholism, you have the disease of alcoholism. It's just that simple. And so I did that fifth step with Lois, and I'm absolutely, totally positive that she pointed out some of my character defects. Now, I don't know when you got here to Alcoholics Anonymous. When I got here, I had no character defects. I didn't have any character defects. I didn't know what a character defect was. It's really difficult to have character defects when you got no bloody character to start with, you know. I want you to know that God has removed those character defects in me that stand in the way of me hurting my fellow man or me hurting me. But I got a lot of character defects today. And I like some of my character defects because that tells me I'm getting character in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and God only knows I need some character here. One of my character defects, and you're all safe this weekend because I'm not doing it, I became a thief after I became sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. I never stole anything in my life until I got sober. And you know, in Alcoholics Anonymous, one of the neatest things about in Alcoholics Anonymous is always somebody will tell you that it's okay, that they have an answer for everything here, you know. And they told me that what I was doing, I was grieving. And, you know, I said, I look real cute when I'm standing in front of one of those judges and say, yes, I'm grieving, you know, as he takes me off to Orange County Jail. I lost that obsession for stealing, and I talked about it in meetings, and that's how it was removed from me. And when I was 17 years sober, I quit smoking for the umpteenth millionth time, and I took up stealing again. And I didn't do it intentionally. If you've never been a thief, it's like if you've never been an alcoholic, you have no idea what I'm talking about. The palms of your hands get sweaty and you start shaking, and it used to be just a drink away, now it's just a steal away. And so my first thing I stole at that time was a piece of gum, dentine gum. And I go through the checkout stand at the grocery store, And I go through there and I see the gum and I say, we're going to take it. No, we're not going to take it. Yes, we are going to take it. No, we're not going to take it. And yes, we are going to take it. So we take the dentine gum, you know. And I've got $200 in my wallet. And I don't want to pay 55 cents for a piece of dentine gum. And so I thought, oh my God, this is going to start again. And I go to a meeting and I share about it, you know, and I try to curb it, to catch it before it starts. And it doesn't stop. And the next thing I steal is a stalk of celery. I'm not a big thief, but you know, some of my friends that have done some hard time have told me I'll go to jail just as fast for a stalk of celery as I will for $10,000. And so I stole a stalk of celery. I've since found out that you just have to ask the produce man, and he'll give you the stalk of celery. He doesn't care. And so I stole a stalk of celery, and because I've learned to rationalize and justify here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was going to make tuna salad. And I decided it was a bigger sin, see, I'm still Catholic, a bigger sin to waste than it was to steal, you know. So I called my sponsor up, Mary Reagan was my sponsor at the time, and I told Mary, I said, my God, I said, I stole a stalk of celery. And she said, Annie, you got to go and you got to tell the produce man that you're stealing his celery. And I said, no, Mary, I'm not going to go tell the produce man or I'm stealing his celery. I said, it says, we admitted to God, to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs, and I'm admitting it. I'm not going to go tell the produce man or I'm stealing this bloody celery. And she said, well, she said, you're going to be embarrassed. She said, it's really going to be very humiliating. You're 17 years sober, and when they take you off to jail. And so what I did with that was, because I don't want to be a thief, I went up to the manager at the store, and I told him my problem, that I had this terrible obsession and to steal, and I asked him if he would walk around the store with me. And he kind of looked at me. I'm surprised he didn't get the guys with the butterfly nets and take me away. And he looked at me real strange, and he said, what do you like to steal? And I said, everything. And so on a Thursday morning, I used to like to shop at 6 o'clock in the morning because apparently I don't particularly like people in the grocery store, and 6 o'clock there isn't anybody around. And so he walked around the store with me, and some Thursdays I would go in and I'd say, I don't have it today, I'm okay. And he kind of looked at me, you know, and I think he was watching me all the time, and I'm getting better. And so I went up, one day I'm going through the checkout stand, and this checker and I are on name basis. His name is Paul, and I said, oh, I forgot my gum. And he said, you quit smoking, Annie? And I said, yes, I did. And he said, you know, I quit drinking some time back. And I said, you did? And I said, I did that some time ago. And he said, do you know Bill W.? And I said, do I know Bill W.? I want you to know, I immediately knew you were watching me, you know, and I want you to know that I will never steal again from Alpha Beta as long as I live. Because there was an AA member standing there. I shared that story one time at a meeting, and this little old lady came up to me and she said, oh, she said, I'm so grateful that you shared that. She said, I like to steal radishes. And I told her, I said, let's get together and we'll steal a whole bloody salad. So that's one of the things I haven't been stealing lately, but I'm smoking. Can't give up something and not have another one, right? So that's why I tell you I'm going to be coming here forever, ever. There's nowhere for me to go. So step 7 was a real hard step for me, and still is a difficult step for me. And step 7 is asking God to remove my shortcomings. My shortcomings showed up a lot in Alcoholics Anonymous when I was new, but they showed up more in my house. And I would run to meetings, and I would tell you all the things I was doing in my home. I've got 3 children, and I was abusing my children. I was abusing my husband, and I was absolutely, totally insane. And you would come up to me, and you'd pat me on the back, and you'd say, it's okay, Annie. You know, you're sober today. And I'd go home, and I'd take that AA coat off, and I'd leave it at the front door, and I'd go in that house, and I was an absolute screaming, raving maniac. And I stopped chasing my husband with knives when I was 4.5 years sober. And I'm not talking about little knives, I'm talking about big knives. And I used to chase him, and he was scared when I would take that butcher knife out, and a lot of people were scared of me in Alcoholics Anonymous. And one day my 3-year-old came to me and said, Mommy, I'll get the knife for you. And it was like someone throwing cold water in my face, and I thought there's something wrong with this program that I'm working here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I started to look in that area. And I really believe that is the last place I get to work the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous is in my home. It's really easy to work it out here in Alcoholics Anonymous when everybody's coming up and they're happy for you and they're loving you and telling you how well you're doing. And then you have to go home and you got to face reality, and you have to do those things that everybody else does, and to do it with so much grace and so much dignity. I've never known how to live until I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. Step 8, I made a list of people I'd harm, and I put me on top of the list. And even today, after all these years, you see, I haven't grown wings and I haven't got a halo. I'm still a human being. Way before I became an alcoholic, I'm a human being. And there's lessons that I have to learn here at Alcoholics Anonymous, and sometimes I learn them easy and sometimes I learn them real hard. And, it's easy. I expect so much out of myself, and I think I've got all this time. I should be doing so much better, and I shouldn't feel this way, and I shouldn't be doing all of this stuff. And you come to me, and I'm going to take a group inventory here, and you'll come to me and you'll tell me some of the sneaky, slimy things you're doing in your life, and I will look at you, and I will try to the best of my ability not to judge you, and I will love you, and I will direct you to a step that you need to be working or to do in something else in order to change that defective character for you. But when it comes to me, I can't do that for me. And so I have to forgive myself that I'm a human being and that I'm going to make error here and keep doing the things that I need to do in my sobriety. I went and I made those direct amends wherever possible, and I've had to go and make direct amends here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I don't like to think that I gossip about you. I usually say I'm genuine concerned, or I'm reporting on you. And I have to remember that your program is none of my business. Your program is God's business. And what you do in your program is, my bottom line here is that we've got to stay sober. Regardless of what we're doing, I've got to stay sober. And that's the bottom line here for me. Step 10, making a daily inventory. When I was new in Alcoholics Anonymous, my attitude was, screw you and the donkey you rode up on. I wasn't going to promptly admit nothing. I couldn't have promptly admit that I was wrong about anything. And there was a guy in my home group, and his name was John Esky, and John was one of those, he'd always get me, and Frank said something about someone telling him that when you squirm and move in meetings, that, you're identifying and you don't want to hear it. And I used to squirm, and it's just, it's awful. And John was always the one that was able to get through to me. And I remember sitting up nights thinking about how I was going to get him. And I'd have that conversation. He'll say this and I'll say that, and I'll get him. And I would go down to that meeting, and I remember talking to somebody one night, and they said, he doesn't really care. He goes home and he goes to bed and he goes to sleep and he doesn't give you another thought. And that upset me even more. I thought, how dare he? How dare he go home and go to bed and go to sleep and not give me another thought? While I'm up pacing the floor thinking of how I'm going to get him. I learned real early that that's what old-timers do. They like to give resentments. They don't like to have them. And so, you see, I like to give resentments. I don't like to have them today. Step 11 was a real difficult step for me. I didn't know what meditation was. I knew what medication was, but I didn't know what meditation was. And I really believe in that step today. But when I was new in Alcoholics Anonymous, and they talked about meditating, and they would tell me how they did, I'd listen to those old-timers, and they'd say they'd get into the chair, and they'd close their eyes, and they'd clear their minds, and I could never clear my mind. There was always 20 conversations going on in my head, always, and I couldn't clear my mind. And I would sit and I would try. I used to carry the big book under my arm. I used to think it was going to go up and through my arm and into my head, and I was going to get all this wonderful knowledge. And I'd sit in this chair, and I'd close my eyes, and I'd try and meditate, because that was what they told me I was to do. And I would get into all these sexual fantasies, far-out sexual fantasies, and I would like some of those today. Or I'd fall asleep, so I had to give up meditating. It was affecting my life. It wasn't working the way it was supposed to work. And so I went to somebody one time and I said, what is meditation? Tell me about meditation. And he said, in the Webster's Dictionary, the definition for meditation is a higher plane of thinking. Now, when you're 8, 9 months sober and your mind is still in the gutter, it's really difficult to have a higher plane of thinking. I really believe that it's through practicing that step through the years, on and off, through the years, that I have a higher plane of thinking. Today, I can stand here today and tell you that for the last 2.5 years, almost 3 years, I work that step every morning. I sit and I do a prayer and I do a meditation, and I get real quiet, and I really see the benefit of it in my life today. And I used to do it 5 days, and then I'd give God the weekend off, and someone said he was probably grateful I gave him the weekend off. And then I would get bored with it, and I wouldn't do it. But for the last 2.5 years, I have disciplined myself to do it. I really believe what the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous says, and I believe this with all my heart. And it says that I have a daily reprieve contingent on my spiritual maintenance, and nothing more and nothing less. And I come to Alcoholics Anonymous to get my spirit renewed, and that's why I come to Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not afraid I'm going to get drunk. I want to grow in the spirit, and that's what it's all about, because Alcoholics Anonymous is a spiritual program. And I really believe when it says in the ABCs in Chapter 5, and it says that no human power could relieve of us of our alcoholism, but God could and would if he was sought. And I really believe that. I really believe there's nobody in here in this room that can relieve me of my alcoholism, but God can and will if I seek him on a daily basis. And so that has become very important for me in my sobriety as I stay sober here in Alcoholics Anonymous, because I have to expand and I have to continue to do that. And the reason I tell you this is, I believe that is because in 1988, 3 of my friends in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm not here to take their inventory or judge them, but 3 of them found it necessary to go out and drink. One man with 22 years of sobriety, and they were people who were going to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And another gal with 18 years of sobriety, and another gal with 17 years of sobriety. Now, 1 out of that 3 has made it back to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I don't ever want to have to go out there and relive anything I've had to live out there drinking or in here in Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't want to do it. So I will continue to do what is necessary in that 11th step for me. And the 12th step says that we carry the message to our other alcoholics. And I really believe that the new people are the lifeblood of Alcoholics Anonymous. I believe that with all my heart. But I want you to know that I need the old-timer in Alcoholics Anonymous. I need the old-timer in Alcoholics Anonymous to let me know that I'm going to get through some of the things I'm going to get through here. Because when I was new in Alcoholics Anonymous, I had this illusion. And this illusion had to be smashed. And the illusion was that once you were sober, everything was going to be wonderful and nothing would ever happen to you again. And my sponsor said she got it all together once, but she forgot where she put it. And things happen to us here. And Frank brought that out too last night. Things do happen to us here. A lot of things happen. And the bottom line again is that we don't drink. And we grow through these things. And we learn to stay sober. And stay sober to me is my whole life. If I decide I want to get drunk, I might as well go out and hand the bartender, here, take it all. And I don't want to go out and get drunk. I want all the stuff that you've given me, and what you've given me is dignity. And what you've given me is giving me back all the things that I didn't come here with because they were all taken away from me. I drank them all up. Now I do everything backwards, and I'm going to do, real briefly, I'm going to tell you what it used to be like and what happened. And that's what the big book tells me, that's what I do here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I want you to understand that none of these things made me an alcoholic. It's because I was allergic to alcohol, and because I had perceived life indifferent than other people, that I was going to be doomed. But I also believed that this was where it started for me. And I'm Irish and I'm Catholic, and that gave me 2 strikes against me right off the bat. And I'm not one of those Irish who's never seen the skies of Ireland. I lived there for 17 years of my life. And my father's an alcoholic, and I didn't know that until I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. All I know is that when my father drank, there was absolutely total terror in our house. I'm the 8th child out of 10, and my father would go out on a Friday night or a Saturday night to Flanagan's, and he'd come home, and he would beat on my mother. And my mother didn't deserve to get beat on, but she got beat on because that's what they do in my country. You've got to keep that woman straight. You know, it's kind of, they don't do it anymore. The women beat on the men today. And I remember as a child, at 6 years of age, I'd be upstairs in that bed, and I would have the pillow over my head, and I had all these things going on inside of me, and I couldn't label them until I came to you, and what they were was guilt, remorse, and as a bad child for thinking all these bad things of my parents. And what I was thinking when he would beat on her was, I pray to that God I was so scared of, and I'd say, please, let him kill her, or maybe she'll kill him, or maybe I will die. And I got up the next morning, I had all this stuff going on inside of me. I went to Catholic school, not because we're rich, simply because that's all there is in the part of Ireland I come from. And people used to say to me, how come you didn't get an education if you went to Catholic school? And I used to come back and say, I had frustrated Irish nuns, because I couldn't tell you that when they put things on the blackboard that I saw them different. I couldn't tell you that I lived in constant fear, terror, all the time as a young child growing up. I couldn't tell you that every time in our house there was absolutely, totally commotion. There was 6 boys and 4 girls, and there was always fighting going on. And it was a very, very small house, and there was a lot of screaming. There was a lot of trying to control and fight, and a lot of fear, and there was a lot of stuff. And every time I tried to learn or try to do something, I would get terrified. In the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous says that the brainstorms are not for us. And I had my first brainstorm in 2nd grade. And I decided this morning that I was going to go into school, and we had catechism every morning. And every morning, Sister would ask me to catechism, and every morning, because of the fear, I would try to memorize that, and I would lose it, and I would just shut off of the fear. And I decided this morning I was going to hit her before she hit me. And I remember going into that class, and I remember sitting in that room, and I remember her asking me the question, and I remember her freaking out, and she grabbed a hold of me, she pulled me out of that seat, and she took that ruler to me, and she started to beat on me, and I upped and hit her as hard as any little 2nd grader can hit somebody. And there was a class petition in this particular classroom, and Mother Superior was teaching that day, and she just happened to turn around, and she just happened to see me do this. And she came in the room, and I stood in front of 30 kids and Mother Superior and said, I didn't do it. I did not do it. Mother Superior and all these kids saw me hit this nun, and I stood there and said I didn't do it. And I was to do that until I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I would stand, and I would look at you straight in the eye after I got caught doing something I shouldn't be doing, and I'd say I didn't do it. Because I could not take responsibility for my actions. I have learned to take responsibility for my actions here in Alcoholics Anonymous. They moved me out of there, and they moved me down to another grade. And I always say 3 weeks, but it probably was a week, but it felt like 3 weeks. And I was to kneel in front of these two statues, and I assumed I was supposed to pray. And I got so tired of kneeling on these hardwood floors. They had great big knots on these floors. And they wanted me to apologize to the class, and I didn't want to apologize to the class because I didn't see I did anything wrong. And I went up to that class. I decided I got tired of kneeling on these hardwood floors, and I stood in front of all these kids. And Sister had that round pointer, and she stuck her in my back, and I'd lowered my eyes, and she wants me to say it out loud. And I say, I'm sorry. And something else happened inside of me. And what happened inside of me was you against me. And it was always you against me from that time on. I used to have psychiatrists cry when I would tell them about the horrible things that happened to me as a young child going to school. And I remember one day sitting with Mary Reagan. I was telling Mary about all these terrible, terrible things. And Mary looked at me and she said, honey, she said, you really had it bad. She said, you know, I had German nuns, and they were trained by Hitler. So there's always somebody in Alcoholics Anonymous who's going to have it just a little bit worse than you, just a little bit worse than you. I spent most of my time in Dunce's Corners with big D's on my head and outside the door, and so I never learned anything. I left school when I was about 13 years of age. I just turned 13 and I left school. And I had all those hopes and dreams where every other girl had. I was going to find me a nice Irish fella and get married and have kids, and I am truly, truly grateful God doesn't answer stupid prayers. I went to work in a factory because that's what we do in my country. And I went to work in this factory, and I found alcohol and I found boys all in the same week. And my first drink was a half a bottle of cognac. And I was at a dance. And if you know anything about my culture, you do not have to be any age in order to order a drink. And I remember being at this dance, and this guy gave me a half a bottle of cognac. And he told me that if I drank this half a bottle of cognac, he would give me a pound note, which was equivalent to $3 in your money at that time. And I was to drink this half a bottle of cognac down, and I wasn't to stop. And I drank that half a bottle of cognac down, and I didn't stop. And I went into the bathroom, and I got very, very, very sick. And I came back out, and I said, give me my money. I would have sold my soul at that age for $3. And I went up to the bar, and I ordered me another drink, and I continued to drink. And I can tell you exactly what it did for me. And what it did for me, that knot that was in the pit of my gut from the time I was 6 years of age was no longer there. And it didn't matter whether my father beat or my mother. It didn't matter whether I had no education. It didn't matter whether there was no food in that house. I found the secret to living. Now, I didn't drink every day from that time on, but I drank at every opportunity from that time on. By the time I was 17 years of age, my father made a decision for me that I had absolutely nothing to do with this decision. He decided I should come to California. But before he was going to send me to California, my father was a very, very hard man, and my father will never know the things that I have known and learned here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I remember there was a man, my dad was a great dog man. He raced greyhounds, and he trained greyhounds for some of the big dog men in Ireland. And there was this Mr. Langland who was very, very wealthy, used to come to the house, and he had, my dad always had a couple of his dogs to train. And his daughter had gone to New Zealand, and he was telling my dad that his daughter was really lonely. And I remember my dad turning to me. I was standing there, and he said, I'll send that thing. We weren't people, we were things in our house. I'll send that thing to New Zealand to your daughter. And there happened to be a big fight in the house, and my other sister, who's 6 years older than me, left home, ran away from home, and went to England, and then decided to come to the States. And she started right home and started to ask for me to come. And so that's how he decided I should come to the States. My aunt took me up to Dublin, and she filled out all these forms. I do have people in my family that know how to take care of those kind of things. And they filled out all these forms and got me ready. And I want you to know that when he told me I was coming to the States, how my thinking was, and I didn't know that this was alcoholic thinking, my thought was, it's going to be different. It's always going to be different. And that's alcoholic thinking. I knew it was going to be different when I came to the States, and I was never going to tell a soul I was Irish. Ever going to tell a soul I was Irish. You know? Now, I had a brogue like I stepped off the bloody boat, but nobody was ever going to know I was Irish. And I just knew if I got away from this family, things would be different. And yes, they were different. And I remember getting on that plane, and I remember drinking champagne. I remember the feeling, and the feeling was freedom. God, I wanted to be free. I wanted to be free more than anything in my life. I wanted to be free. And it was a false feeling of freedom because it was behind champagne. And I got to this over here. And I was never to feel that feeling again until I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. And that feeling of freedom didn't come to me real easy. It's come real slow. And I want you to know that I have got all of the promises. At some time in my sobriety, all of the promises in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous have come through for me here in Alcoholics Anonymous. I got here and I stayed with family up in Palos Verdes for the next couple of years, and I drove these people absolutely, totally insane. And these people were a good family. And I did go back and I did make an amends to these people, and they were truly, truly grateful that I'd found a fellowship called Alcoholics Anonymous. They knew there was something wrong with me, they just didn't know what. I was very impressed with this family. I was impressed with their home, and I was impressed with their bar. She had a wonderful bar. And I used to drink 108 proof vodka, and she would drink 108 proof vodka, and I'd fill a bottle up of water, and she was just getting her good mountain water that she used to buy. And she could never understand how come she wasn't getting a buzz on. Well, she was drinking water is what she was drinking. These people wanted to help me, and they didn't know how to help me, and I didn't know that I was suffering from this disease. And when I drank at that time of my life, I used to break out when I'd get out and drunk. I would break out in big welts. I was really allergic to alcohol. I mean, just all over my body I would break out, and I'd have to sit in bathtubs of water. And she wanted me to go to school because I couldn't tell her that I couldn't go to school. I couldn't tell her that I couldn't read or write, and when she got messages, she didn't get all her messages because some of them I couldn't write down. And I remember her taking me down to Redondo Beach High, and I remember standing outside that door, and I shook a lot. And I shook a lot because of the fact of some of the stuff I drank, and for the fact that I had a lot of secrets, and I was always running down alleys, and I was always hiding things from people. And one of the greatest gifts I have here in Alcoholics Anonymous is that my life's an open book. There isn't anything that I can't tell you here in Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't ever have to run down alleys, and I don't ever have to hide my life today. That woman took me down to Redondo Beach High, and I remember standing outside that door, and I couldn't tell her that I was terrified of my peers, and I couldn't tell her that I couldn't go in there and fill out those papers, and I was standing at the door, and I was shaking so bad. And I can tell you what I was experiencing today. I was going into a catatonic state of mind with absolute sheer fear that somebody was going to find out something about me, and I slid down that door. And she looked at me and she said, "Annie, you don't have to do it." And I didn't have to do it. And I started running around Redondo Beach Pier at that time, and I started running around a lot of people who used a lot of hard drugs. And that was in the 60s. And I never got involved in hard drugs, and the only reason I didn't get involved in hard drugs, and I'm truly, truly grateful today because they would still be taking me off the ceiling. I was bad enough with alcohol. See, alcohol worked for me as an upper, I mean, it gave me energy. It was an upper for me. It wasn't a downer. A lot of people use it as a downer, as a depressant. It was an upper. I just would get real high off of that booze. And I didn't get involved in drugs simply because I was terrified that if I was caught, I would be deported back to Ireland, and my father would meet me at Dublin Airport, and he would kill me first and ask questions later. My father caught me smoking when I was 10 years of age, and as I was standing there, and he's running that cigarette, down my throat, man, he was just running it down my throat, and I'm telling him I'm not smoking. And I thought he was going to kill me. He took a dog's leash to me, whipped me, and he kicked me. And my mother ran into the living room. She said, "Jack, you're going to kill her." And he said, "Yes, I'm going to kill her. She's no good and never will be any good." And, they couldn't let me out of that house for 2 weeks because I was so badly beaten. I was whipped like a dog. I was black and blue all down through my back and all through my legs. And that memory stayed with me, and I knew that if I was deported out of this country because of drugs, that man would meet me at Dublin Airport, and he would kill me first and ask questions later. I moved on uptown at that time of my life. And the other thing that I like being sober today, and I don't ever want to forget it, is today this morning I had a shower. And today my hair is combed, and my makeup's all in the right place. My eyebrow's not on my cheek, and I got clean clothes on. And I wasn't always that way. God, don't ever let me forget that wasn't always that way. I used to wear rubber go-aheads that people wear when they go camping to go take a shower in the campgrounds. I wear rubber go-aheads, an old pair of jeans, and an old T-shirt, and I used to walk along Catalina Avenue, and I'd give all the cars the finger. I hated everybody. I didn't want anything to do with you Americans because all you ever talked about was education. Now, whether you did or not, in my head, that's all you talked about. And I didn't want anything to do with you because I had no education. And I didn't want anything to do with the Irish because all they did was move, change addresses and come to this country and to behave the same way here as they did over there, and I did not want to be Irish. I like being Irish today. I truly do like being Irish today. I like being Irish today because I really believe if it wasn't for us Irish, you could hold your AA meetings in a phone booth. And now I know a lot of people don't like that. And my sponsor said the reason why God created whiskey was he was afraid the Irish were going to take over the world. So he thought he kind of stopped them a little bit. So I used to walk along Catalina Avenue, and I drank everything and anything that anybody ever bought me. But when I bought, I drank Ripple. I don't know if these young people know what Ripple is. Ripple wine. It used to come in a long neck bottle, and it was 39 cents a bottle. And I used to carry that in a paper sack. Now, I don't consider myself a wino. I guess I would be a winette. But I never felt cheated when I drank Ripple. And the reason why I didn't feel cheated when I drank Ripple is because you could get 2 drunks for the price of 1 when you drank Ripple, because you drink water the next day and you got drunk all over again. And I'd walk along. I took the lesser 2 evils at this time of my life. I started running around with Mexicans. Now, I could not hold a job, and I'd long left these people, and I couldn't get a job. I did a lot of different things, but working was not one of them. And I ended up running around with a group of Mexicans over there in Torrance, Lameda. And this guy was drinking in the morning. I was only drinking in the afternoon, and he introduced me to the morning drink. And it was a very, very exciting time in my life. It was getting beat up and jumping out of cars, and absolutely total insanity is what it was. Norm Alfie always says that when you drink, don't think. And I got to thinking one day, I was living over in Gardena, and I got to thinking that, I've been running around with this guy long enough, and he ought to marry me. So I hitchhiked a ride over to Torrance, Lameda to find him, and I found him. And I want you to know it took a half a gallon of Red Mountain wine to get up the courage to go do that. And I found him, and I want you to know that you could smell me way before you could see me. And I proposed to him. And he looked at me and he said, I wouldn't marry you if you were handed to me on a silver platter. And I just could not deal with that kind of rejection. I still have a hard time dealing with rejection, but I couldn't deal with that kind of rejection. And my next thought was, I'm going to kill you, son of a bitch, because one less Mexican in this world, we'll all be better off. And I never drove a car. I didn't own a driver's license until I came to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I did a little driving in my life. And I got him in that car that evening, and I had a bottle of wine between my legs, and I decided this was the evening that he was going to get killed. And I had no idea, you see. I never thought that I was going to get hurt in this. I was just going to kill him. I just said, if I kill him, then everything will be okay. I've learned that that's what I like to do. I like to kill people off so that I can start all over again. See, I have this thing I want to be good, you see. And Alcoholics Anonymous tells me that I'm not a bad person trying to get good. I'm a sick person trying to get well here in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I turned the wheel of the car on the Harbor Freeway, and I took 25 feet of the guardrail and went down 30 feet in the embankment. And I thought I killed me a Mexican. Now, what I learned out of that, folks, is if you're going to kill one Mexican, you got to kill the whole family, For some strange reason, they don't take too kindly to you messing with the people, even if they do call you Annie the Irish Mexican. Now, I learned to speak Spanish like I was native to the tongue, except it was all the swear words. I ended up in Long Beach one night with this guy, and we were drinking. And you see, I know there's something wrong. There's something desperately wrong. I didn't walk away from that car accident. I really believe that was that car accident. My life turned one more time, not for the better, but one more time for what was to come for me. I ended up in the hospital, and I was bleeding internally. And they wanted to send a telegram to my parents, and they wanted to get permission from my parents. I think they've changed that law in California. I was 19 years of age. And I couldn't tell my parents. I lay there, and I had all kinds of Venus in me, and they thought that I wasn't going to make it. And I really didn't care if I made it. I wanted to die. I didn't want to live. I didn't know anything about this living. And I remember these people came down from the hill, and they looked at me, and they couldn't sign for me either to have this surgery. And so they packed me, and they stayed and watched me all night long, and the doctors, and they couldn't understand why. Because my parents would not understand. And the priest came in, and he gave me the last rites, and I made amends to this priest. And that priest came into that room because, you see, even then I was looking for something. I used to go to St. Lawrence's Church looking for something, and I didn't know that it was alcoholism. I knew there was something desperately missing in my life. I just didn't know that it had anything to do with booze. And that priest came to that hospital, and he sat in that bed, and he gave me the last rites, and he handed me a rosary, and he told me that I better start praying. And he said, if you die tonight, he said, you're surely going to burn in the fires of hell because of what you're doing in your life. And I remember asking for that rosary. I remember throwing that rosary at him and saying, you take your God, and you take your rosary, and you get the hell out of my life. Because if there is such a thing called hell, I'm living it. I'm living it right between my ears. And that was when my life started to turn, not for the better, but for what was to come. I ended up in Long Beach with this guy, and I ended up getting very drunk and disorderly one more time. It seems that all that time that's the only state of mind I knew to be in. And I remember calling the cops, and that's another thing I learned. You don't ever call the cops on Mexicans. They don't appreciate that either. And I called the cops, and I was in a phone booth, and they used to have phone booths in California. You don't have too many of them today. And he kicked the door, and he kicked me, and I yelled, "Uncle." And you see, I have no illusions. There's not something missing here in my head. Normal people go home, and they run from things like that. I crawl out of that phone booth, and I go to the bar he was at, and I said, "Let's have a drink, and we'll discuss this," you know. I learned in that inventory that I will stay somewhere forever because I'm absolutely, totally terrified to be abandoned. I'm absolutely, totally terrified for anybody to leave me, and I don't care what you do to me, just don't leave me. And I've had to learn those things here at Alcoholics Anonymous when I was new, and I would become friends with you, and then you had to move to another state, or you were going to do something else, and I would go through that horrible feeling of abandonment. And I know today that you don't abandon me here in Alcoholics Anonymous. You just go on to do the things that you need to do. And I would do anything not to have that feeling of abandonment inside of me. I also had another real warped thing going for me when I was out there drinking and when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous was that if you didn't hit me, you didn't love me. I identified getting hit with being loved because that's how I was raised. And that's the only time I got attention was when somebody was belting me around. And I also had a thing that I wanted somebody, I would antagonize you, and it talks about my type of personality in the 12 and 12. It says that we can bring out the worst and the best. And I used to bring out the worst and the best people. I would antagonize you until you hit me. And I know today that what I wanted to do was I wanted somebody to kill that part of me that kept screwing up. If it would only kill that part of me that kept screwing up, then I would be okay. I learned here in Alcoholics Anonymous that if you kill that part of me, you kill all of me, because that's the part of me that you love here in Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, in the time that I've been sober, in the 22 years I've been sober, nobody has found it necessary to hit me here in Alcoholics Anonymous. I want you to know there was a lot of people when I was new in Alcoholics Anonymous that would have liked to have hit me. They just never found it necessary to do so. I ended up in Arizona with this guy, and it was in Passcode, Arizona, and I was absolutely drunk out of my mind, and I said some things. I don't know what I said, but I said some things to this Mexican guy's wife, and they don't like you to say things to their wives either. I had a mouth on me that no truck driver could possibly use the language that I used. But I went out to the backseat of a car to pass out, and 4 guys came out after me, and they pulled me out of the backseat of that car, and they got me out in the middle of that road, and they worked me over, and they worked me over good. And this one guy said, "We'll go get the truck and we'll run over her." And the guy goes get the truck, and as the headlights are coming, and these 3 guys have got me down on this dirt road, and they jump off of me, and I don't know where to this day I got the sense to roll off that dirt road, but I rolled off that dirt road. And I got off of that dirt road, and I'm the type of drunk. I live by 4 mailboxes, a Ralph's Market or some sign, and I have no idea where I am. I'm in Arizona somewhere, Prescott, Arizona somewhere, and I'm never going to get back to Los Angeles. And my hair is full of gravel, and my face looks like that truck has run over it. And I walk along the dirt road, and the guy comes along, and he picks me up. And we go to a liquor store, we pick up a bottle, and we go to a dirty motel, and that's how I learned to solve my problems. I have no idea how to solve my problems until I come to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. When I came to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, you talked a great deal about dying. I know what it's like to die. I know what it's like to die when you're sitting here in Alcoholics Anonymous, and they come to that part in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous and say, you have to let go of all your old ideas. And my stomach would just kind of grab, and I'd say, I can't let go of all my old ideas. I would literally die if I let go of all my old ideas. I knew where my old ideas took me. I knew what would happen to me with my old ideas. I did not know what was going to happen to me with your new ideas here at Alcoholics Anonymous. I am truly, truly grateful to those people in Alcoholics Anonymous that were there for me, that sat with me and knew how far down that snake pit I'd gone, and spoon-fed me Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was allowed to trust and learn to trust them to try their new ideas here in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And if I had not tried your new ideas, I would have missed a whole lot here in this fellowship. But when I was out there and I ended up in this little room, and I used to call it my 4x4, and I had a hot plate and I had a sink and I had cockroaches and I had a gal named Annie. And I died 1,000 times in that little room. I lived in that little room for 6 months and I literally died. And I remember I could not function. The only time I was ever rid of what was going on inside of me was under the influence. I could not function without drinking. And I was so full of terror. And I'd start drinking to get up the courage to go down the halls to take a shower, because you had to go down the halls to take a shower. And I was times where I couldn't even come up with the $10 a week to pay for this room. And I would start drinking to get up the courage to go down the halls to take a shower, and I'd always overshoot the mark. I'd never go down the halls to take a shower. I remember one night lying in this little room. I remember sucking off a vodka bottle. I remember screaming as loud as I possibly could scream, if I could find somebody to understand me. I only wanted one lousy person to understand me. I remember getting out of that bed, and I remember putting on those old rubber go-aheads and those old pair of jeans and heading out on Western Avenue. And I want you to know I always found somebody. I want you to know it always ended up the same way. I want you to know it ended up my mouth would get in the way and I'd get beat up and I was thrown and left to my own devices one more time. I never asked for rooms full of people to understand me. I've been understood beyond understanding here in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. I can't begin to even tell you the understanding that I've got here in this Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. I only wanted one, and God saw fit that I should have a multitude of people to understand Annie in Alcoholics Anonymous. At that time of my life, two people came into my life, and I just knew that if I could get away from these Mexicans, and if I could just start life over anew again, that my life would be different. And this little gal, her name was Carol Poole, and Carol took the time and taught me how to write my name. And I want you to know it took a lot of half gallons of wine to write my name. And I used to think she was so much younger than me. She probably was a year or so younger than me. And there was another gal, her name was Ann Wilson, and she took me out of that room, and she moved me to Long Beach. And I had a paper sack, and I had a green card, and everything I owned was in that paper sack. And I moved to Long Beach, and now I could write my name, and I told people I had a 4-year college degree. I walked across UCLA campus one day and automatically got a 4-year college degree. And all these well-meaning people were getting me these fancy jobs, and I said, no, I was going to do something different. And I did something different. I ended up in Anaheim Street in Long Beach, and I did 8 months in Anaheim Street. And Anaheim Street's not a nice place to be, but I ended up in Anaheim Street, and I'm the gal that came off at Beacon Street in San Pedro. And I worked down in Anaheim Street for that 8 months, and while I was down in Anaheim Street, this skinny, puny little guy came along, and he asked me to date me. And I asked him if he had a job. And I want you to know you could really smell me way before you could see me. And I said, do you work? And he said, no, he didn't work. And I said, I don't date guys who don't work. You know, I had a lot of nerve. And so he went out and got himself a job, and he's been working ever since. And this man was very gentle and very kind. He's probably the nicest person I ever met in my whole life. But I antagonized him. We went together all of 6 weeks, and I antagonized him, and he was from Minnesota, and he still is from Minnesota. And I antagonized him, and he gave me two of the blackest eyes I've ever owned. I mean, I was black all the way down to here. And I knew that we were in love and we would have to get married. You know, that's how I identified love. And we got married, and he took me back to Minnesota, and my life was going to be different, and I was going to, he was going to take care of me, and I was going to drink in the manner I wanted to be always come accustomed to. And things started to change. He started taking bottles out of my purse, and he told me when I could drink and when I couldn't drink. And it was absolutely total insanity. I met his parents, and both his parents are gone today, and I love his parents very much. And it took me a long time in my sobriety to learn to look at these people and know that they were really good people. I didn't identify with his mother. She didn't drink, she didn't smoke, she didn't gossip. She went to church on Sunday, and she didn't screw around, and I had absolutely no identification with this woman. And they kind of looked at me and thought, my God, what did he bring home here? You know, and you know, a strange thing happened when I left Long Beach on Anaheim Street. All of the people that I was going to start anew, and birds of a feather flocked together. You know, all those people moved to Minnesota. You know, the names were different, faces were different, but I found all those alcoholics right there in that little town. In 1965, they were still talking about Annie coming to Argyle, Minnesota. I decided I made a terrible mistake in this marriage. He was taking those bottles out of my purse, and he was telling me when I could drink and when I couldn't drink. And I decided I made a terrible mistake, and I ought to check this guy out a little further, and that we ought to get back to California and get divorced. And I find that Mexican that really loved me. And so we came back to California and got another one of those brainstorms. I decided what I needed was a baby. Somebody had told me that if you have a baby, you automatically grow up, and they lied to me one more time. I tell the girls that I sponsor that alcoholic women shouldn't have babies. Children cannot raise children, you know, and that's what I was a child. And I got pregnant, and 5 minutes after I'm pregnant, I no longer want to be pregnant. And the doctor I found put me on beer and wine. I was to have 1 glass of wine a day and 1 beer a day, and I was having a 6-pack a day and half a gallon. I spent that 9 months by the toilet bowl. There was 5 other girls in that apartment building that had babies, and each one of them were very, very happy, and they went out and had their babies and came back, and I knew that it was going to be that way for me. And I had my baby, and I put that baby in my arms, and I just knew that life was going to be wonderful, and I knew that I was going to be a good parent, and I took that baby in my arms, and I didn't get that wonderful feeling of love, and everything was going to be good. I got an overwhelming feeling of responsibility, and what do we do now? And I took that baby home, and I wanted to be a good mommy, and I didn't know how to be a good mommy. I wanted to be a good mommy so bad, and today I don't know what a good mommy is, and I don't care to know. All I know is I got a wonderful relationship with all three of my children. I got three of the most beautiful children that you ever want to meet in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I want you to know that it was because of the women in Alcoholics Anonymous and because of the women nurturing me and loving me that my children are doing very well today. And because I worked the program of Alcoholics Anonymous in raising my children, because it works in my life. I very quickly got into abusing this little girl. And she was, my husband would take me out for many, many nights. And I was still hitting those bars, and I was still doing all the things that I did even when I wasn't married. And I remember one night my husband pulling me off of her because I was totally insane. I'm not proud of some of these things. I knew if he got me a little house, he got me a little house, and things didn't change. And then he gave me an ultimatum. And that's when I came to you the very first time, and I didn't want to be an alcoholic. And I left Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I came back to you later, after that 8 months, when I came back to you, I weighed 85 pounds. I was malnutritious, and my liver was shot. And, in the last year, I've had some physical problems, and I had some tests ran, and I had changed doctors, and I didn't mention that I was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and don't ask me why. I just was anxious to get whatever I had to get done. And so they went through the thing, and they said, there's something wrong with your liver, and we got to run some more tests. And then I told her, she said, this only occurs in people who are hard drinkers or real heavy drinkers. And so then I told her I was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And she looked at me and she said, if you drink, you're going to die. And I said, no shit, Tell me something I don't know, I mean, if anything I know today, that yellow streak in the back of my back is still getting wider and wider each year. I'm sober. I know I'm going to die if I drink, and it's probably a very slow death. If I was going to do it, I'd like to do it fast. Might as well put a gun in my mouth. And I thought that was good information. And so when I got here, I was malnutritious. And on that June 16th, I had been on a 4-day drunk, and right before I came to you. And there was 2 other people, and Billy D and Leona, both of them are dead, and they both died from alcoholism. Most of the people I ran with are all dead, and they died from alcoholism. And on that morning, I sat there in that house, and I had come home, and I had got someone else had worked me over one more time. And I was sitting there, I'm all black and blue and all messed up, and that little girl sitting at the end of that couch, and her little diapers are all hanging off, and her little eyes are kind of sunken in her head, and her little legs are all black and blue, and that man sitting over at the other end of the couch, and his head is hanging down, and he's wringing his hands, and I'm sitting there, and I don't know what to do, and I'm going to call that gal. And, I get absolutely to tell me this is a moment of clarity here. And I saw where I was going, and I didn't want to go. I didn't want to go back to Beacon Street in San Pedro, and I didn't want to go back to Anaheim Street, and I didn't want to go back to North Long Beach. And to tell me that is a moment of clarity. And I looked at that man, and I said, I'm going to call that gal that wants to be my friend. And he looked at me, and he said, you go right ahead. He said, you've never completed anything in your life, and you won't stay there either. And I called that gal that wanted to be my friend. And she took me to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because I don't believe I had a slip. I really believed I didn't want to be an alcoholic, and I didn't know what an alcoholic was. And I sat in my first meeting on June 16, 1968, and I sat by the door, and I sat in my hands, and I shook, and I shook. And the man stood up here like I am tonight. And if I know anything tonight, I know what I suffer from. And he told me what I suffered from. And I heard it. And the one thing I wanted you to do when I came to you was please stop my head from racing, take this knot out of the pit of my gut, and make these shakes go away. And the man told me that it was the first drink that got me drunk. And I never knew it was the first drink that got me drunk. I always thought it was the 6th or 7th drink that got me drunk. The man told me that I suffered from a threefold disease, an allergy to the body, coupled with obsession of the mind, and I was spiritually sick. And he told me that I could get sober, I could stay sober the same way I drank. Now, I'm a daily drinker and a periodic drunk. And I left that meeting, and I'd like to tell you that I didn't want to drink, and I wanted to drink more than anything in my life. I wanted to drink. I could taste it, because I hadn't done the one thing I had asked you to do, was stop my head from racing, take this knot out of the pit of my gut, and make these shakes go away. And I knew that if I had one drink, it would stop my head from racing, take the knot out of the pit of my gut, and make the shakes go away. And I hear the man say, if you don't take the first drink, you won't get drunk. And I went to another meeting. I went to a lot of meetings. My first 5 years of sobriety were not the greatest. They really were not the greatest. When I was 2.5 years sober, when I was 9 months sober, I gave birth to a baby boy. And I brought that baby boy home, and I wanted to be a good mommy because I'm sober. And now I'm abusing my husband, I'm abusing this little girl, and I'm abusing this little boy. And then I get pregnant again, and I know what causes it, but I'm not willing to give it up. I got 3 children, and I 2 of them after I got sober. And my sponsor was always on my door, and this woman had 5 children. and I would call her, and Lois would drop everything, and she'd be there. And I would pace the floor, and I didn't know what to do. And I'd go to meetings, and the only time I was okay was for an hour and a half, and I sat in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. For 1 hour and a half, I knew that I was going to be okay, and the rest of the time I was not okay. And when I was 2.5 years sober, and I know I've almost ran out of time, but please be patient. I got to tell you this for those of you who I knew and are in trying times in your sobriety. Please remember that I tell you that just around the corner, the miracle is going to happen for you. And it will happen if you just don't drink. You just don't drink. And I ended up beating my son, and I beat him. And I don't tell you this because I'm proud of it. I tell you this because this is how it happened for me. And it doesn't necessarily have to be this way for you, because there was so much rage and so much anger, and there was nothing now to buffer me with life. And there was no alcohol, and there was no pills, there was no nothing. And I didn't know how to deal with what was going on inside of me. And I will not stand here before you today and tell you that I was not working the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was working the steps with everything I had, and it wasn't much, but I was working those steps to the best of my ability. I was active in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was running out and doing a lot of stuff, and I got very involved. And I'm still very involved in Alcoholics Anonymous. I ended up beating him, and I beat him, and I beat him till his eyes rolled back in his head. And this man came to the door, and he was 10 miles away from home, but he came to my door on that particular day. And he took that baby away from me. He came to my door for a cup of coffee. And he took that baby away from me, and he said, "You call somebody." And I called Mary Lee, and Mary Lee came and got me and took me to a meeting. And I went in that meeting that night, and I sat in that meeting, and I said, "Please help me. Please help me. Help me make the 180-degree turn that you're talking about here. I can't make it. I cannot stay sober and do the things that I'm doing to my family." I knew that I couldn't stay sober, but I knew that I couldn't drink either. And I remember them reading those promises, and you promised me that I would intuitively know how to handle situations that used to baffle me. You promised me that fear of people would leave me and economic insecurity would go. You promised me that God would do for me that I couldn't do for myself. And you promised me that I would know peace, and I had no peace. And somebody said something to me, and I threw a chair down in that meeting, and I ran out of that meeting. And I understand so fully today why I didn't drive till I was 4.5 years sober. And a woman came out after me. Her name was Edna, and I mentioned Edna every podium I'm at. And Edna grabbed a hold of me, and I started to cry. I could not cry when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. There was no tears left. I was dead inside. I was cold inside. A guy held me one night while another one punched my face, and he wanted me to cry. And I said, "You go right ahead and you kill me, because I ain't going to cry. I will not cry." There was a guy in my home group, Walt Stiles, God rest his soul, and he was a great big man. And Walt would go for a podium, and every time Walt got for a podium, because his gratitude overwhelmed him, Walt would start crying, and I would sit out there, and the hair would stand on the back of my neck, and I would clench my fist, and I'd say, "Why does he cry?" I know today why Walt cried. And then they grabbed a hold of me, and I started crying. I knew there was going to be absolutely nothing left of me. There was going to be absolutely just a pool of nothing. And I know today why God gives us tears. God gave me tears because my cleansing of my soul, and my soul needed so much cleansing. I really believed I suffered from a tremendous spiritual illness. I really believed that for me. And then they took me to Orange County Psycho. Now, I didn't stay at Orange County Psycho. Edna gave me life, and it talks about that in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. If we were painstaking in doing these things, that some of us have felt that we were reborn, and I was reborn that night in that woman's arms. And Edna, 3 months after she gave me life, Edna chose to commit suicide. And to this day, and Edna was 9 years sober, and to this day, I don't know why Edna chose to commit suicide or what was going on in her life, but Edna gave me life that night. And I ended up in a group of women who were child abusers, and I'm not here to give you a plug for psychiatrists or psychologists, but my big book says that those professional people are there to help us. And I ended up at this group, and these women threatened that they're going to call the DA and take my babies away from me, and I got scared, and I ran from that. And I ended up going to this doctor on a one-to-one basis, and I really believed from the bottom of my heart that if it wasn't for Alcoholics Anonymous, and it wasn't for a loving God, and it wasn't for this man, I would not be standing before you today. I really believed that. I was very, very, very sick. And I ended up with this man, and he told me that I wanted someone to love me. And I knew there was nobody in the world that could possibly love me. I had nothing to offer anybody, and I didn't know how to give love, nor did I know how to receive love. I could not allow anybody to come near me. When I was new in Alcoholics Anonymous, you came up close to me, I would back off, and I would kind of push you away. I couldn't bear to be touched. I could not bear it. And I said, "There isn't anybody that loves me." And he said, "There's got to be somebody that loves you, Annie." And I said, "There is nobody that loves me." And he said, "What about those people in AA?" And I said, "Those people in AA tolerate me,
The only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking, and God only knows, they know I have a desire to stop drinking. And you know that sponsor that I had? And he said, what about, sponsor? And I left that man's office, and I went home, and I called Lois on the phone. And I whispered in the phone, and I said, Lois, do you love me? And she said, Annie, I love you so much. Now, Lois had told me on a daily basis for the first 3.5 years of my sobriety that I was a child of God, and God loved me, and she loved me, and I never heard it. And I really believe that we hear when we're ready to hear, and we see when we're ready to see. And I believe that Lois loved me. And from Lois loving me, I started to believe there was others that could love me. But I couldn't love myself. I didn't know how to love myself. I was absolutely hated me with a terrible passion. And I remember I started to reach to my children. And today I want you to know that I love my children very, very much. My children are I love them very, very much, and I hug them. There isn't a day that goes by, my oldest girl's living home with us, that I don't hug her and don't love her, and my youngest daughter and my son. I love my children very, very much. God has been real good to me. I ended up, at that time, I really believed there wasn't anybody, and I really started to touch people, or touch my children. And the Serenity Prayer says that we accept the things we cannot change, encourage to change the things we can. Now, I couldn't love you, and I didn't know that emotion, and nobody had ever asked me to be their sponsor. I was 5 years sober, and nobody ever asked me to be their sponsor. And this little gal came into the program, her name was Cindy, and she asked me to be her sponsor, and I was terrified to be her sponsor, and I said I would share with her what I found here in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. Cindy had used a lot of LSD and a lot of drugs, and she came into a meeting one night, and she's sitting by the door, and she was hallucinating. And I went over to her, and I want you to know it was the longest walk I ever made across that room. And I took that little girl out of that room, and I went into the bathroom with her, and I sat on the floor, and I held her in my arms, and I never held anybody that close before, not even my kids. And I rocked her back and forth, and she looked at me with the bluest eyes I've ever seen in anybody, and she said, Annie, you love me so much. And the tears ran down my face, and the hair stood in my arms, and I started to cry, and I said, my God, Cindy, yes, I do. I had felt that electricity went through my body. For the first time, I felt love for another human being, for the first time in me. And true to see, I'm one of those that believes it's not so much what I can give you, it's what God wants me to learn through you. And through you people, I've learned an awful lot. And through Cindy, I've been able to love an awful lot of people in Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't know that I had such a well of love within me. And it's come from a power greater than myself. I didn't know that. I always thought it was always just hate and anger. And I have a lot of love to give people today. I sponsor a lot of women today in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's really, really a privilege for me that they come to me and they share the secrets of their heart with me. And they take direction from me. Because you see, for so long, I thought I had nothing to give. I just briefly want to tell you about my children. And because I'll often ask where these children come from. And I know where they come from. And they come from people in Alcoholics Anonymous. Because the women in Alcoholics Anonymous have been the strong force in my life. I love the men in Alcoholics Anonymous too, because I'm one of those that believes there's only two kinds of alcoholics, male and female. And I need the male in my life as much as I need the female in my life. My oldest girl is 24 years of age today, and she graduated almost 2 years ago from USC, a straight A student, just a beautiful girl. And she got, she's real independent, and if selfishness is independence, she's got it. And just very giving, very loving, very good for my spirit. She's got a beautiful spirit. And my boy is 21 years of age, who I abused horribly. And Ronnie and I have always had a kind of a personality clash. It's a love-hate relationship. But he decided to go into the Army last year, and he's in the Army. He's up in Maryland in the NTs. And Ronnie and I have made a lot of breakthroughs, and Ronnie calls me, and I've spoon-fed Alcoholics Anonymous to Ronnie. Ronnie is not into alcoholism or drugs at this time in his life, nor is my oldest girl, and I don't know when it will happen for any one of them, but none of them are into it. But he was having a problem when he went to Maryland for the separation of leaving home, and I started to spoon-feed Alcoholics Anonymous to him, and I sent him some tapes of members of Alcoholics Anonymous that I admire and respect in the programs, and it's really helped him. And he really enjoys listening to the speakers in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's helped him grow somewhat. He was home in June, and we had a real good relationship today. My youngest daughter, who is going to be 20 in December, is down in San Diego, and it must be wonderful to have choices, and because I never knew I had choices till I came here. And she doesn't know whether she wants to be an occupational therapist or she wants to be a doctor. And she's an absolutely joy. She's a beautiful young girl. I'd like to tell you that my marriage, in the 25 years I've been married, that we have walked the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. We've got a wonderful relationship. It has been the most painful so painful, especially in the last, I probably don't even want to talk about it, especially in the last 11 years. It's been real painful. My husband is practicing. Maybe I shouldn't talk about it. I used to say at this point in my story is that we have this strange and beautiful relationship. He's strange and I'm beautiful. But in the last 11 years it's been real painful. But again, because of Alcoholics Anonymous and because of Al-Anon and because of the people in Alcoholics Anonymous and because I again allowed God to use me, I've been able to stay sober in that relationship. I have not been able to leave that relationship. I've tried many times. And so therefore that tells me that that relationship is not over. And until God removes me or removes him, it will not be over. Right now he's not drinking. And I don't even like to say that out loud because I have tremendous fear. He's not going to meetings, but I know somewhere down deep inside of me that it's going to be okay. You know, I know that. I'm 22 years sober, and it's taken me 22 years of sobriety to decide now I want a one-to-one relationship. And I think I'm going to be able to have a one-to-one relationship. You see, I'm 46, but I'm actually only 22. You know, I just live in this old container, and I really believe that if I don't work it out with this man, that I will continue to repeat the pattern, and I will not work it out with anybody. And so life is good today. Dick looked at me and Peggy asked me, and they said, "Are you okay?" And Jill, and because they've listened to the saga of this relationship for many years, and it is okay. And I'm afraid to feel the joy of it because I'm afraid it'll be taken away from me. But that's how I am. My father died from alcoholism, and my sister died 3 years later, and my brother died 4 months after she died. And there's been a lot of stuff that's happened in my family through the years, and I will shut up now. I never got to know or hear the things from my father I always wanted to hear, that other people get to hear. When I was 2 years sober, I went home to Ireland, and my father took a poker to me and went to hit me because I was a sober member of AA. When I was 11 years sober, I went home. Now I'm much weller. Don't you think I'm weller? And I went home, and I wanted to tell me that he loved me, and I wanted to hear that from him. And there was 7 of us home, and I'd like to tell you I came from priests and nuns. I don't come from alcoholism. And my father called us in the bedroom, and he told us he hated every one of us, and that every one of us was terrible mistakes, and every one of us should have been drowned at birth. And you know, I threw it in on mistake, because you see, all my life I thought I was a mistake until I came to you, and you told me I was not a mistake, that God does not make mistakes. And my brothers reached for a drink, and I stood there, and I just ached inside, and I thought, I don't want to be a mistake. Please don't ever let me be a mistake again. And I remember what you told me, and you told me, Annie, you're not a mistake. And I read a lot today, and I've read a lot of self-help books, and I have supported all those people. And I want you to know that the old-timer in Alcoholics Anonymous told me years and years ago, they said that everything I need to know is in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and everything I need to know is in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. But I've read all those other books, and they don't give me any of the answers. The answers are in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous for me. I read a book today. I read a lot of different books, but there's one book I like to read, and it's called Gabran, and I do a meditation on that one. It's The Prophet. And there's a line in there, he talks about the children, and he says the children come through us, they're not of us. And you see, I came through those people, I came through. I'm not of those people. I'm of the people of Alcoholics Anonymous, because you are the people. You're the ones that walked the extra mile with me when nobody else would walk with me. You're the ones that sat and held my hand when nobody else would possibly sit and hold my hand. You're the ones that have seen an Annie that nobody else could possibly see, and you pulled her out. And God, she walks tall with dignity today, because I am a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. If you're new here this morning, I hope you find 1/4 of what I found here at this fellowship. I love Alcoholics Anonymous more than anything in my life. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. My life began here 22 years ago. God bless each and every one of you.